Okay, welcome back. Today we're going to learn to regroup mixed numbers to subtract. So as you know, mixed numbers are different fractions that have whole numbers and a fraction part. So how are we going to actually subtract them? We're going to have to regroup them, and you know this method. We'll show you as we get going forward. Here's your warm-up. You can see that the problem just says add or subtract. So go ahead and do your best to add or subtract these problems and come back when you are done. Thank you. Here are your answers to the warm-up. For number 1, we had 4 and 5/5. We can't have 5/5, so we added that one whole to 4 to get 5. For 2, we had 7 and 20/11. So 20/11 had to be changed to a mixed number of 1 and 9/11. So we add the 1 and 7 together to get 8 9/11. And then for number 3, I had to get a common denominator of 20. That's the least common multiple of 5 and 4. So then I had to change the denominators and the numerators. And when I did that, we had 8 minus 2 is 6. 16 minus 5 is 11. And for number 4, I noticed that 9 can be our common denominator. So I just had to change 1/3 to 3/9. 6 minus 1 is 5. 3 minus 1 is 2. That's how you get 5 and 2/9. Not every fraction when you're adding or subtracting works this well. Sometimes you have a smaller number in the first fraction than the second number, and that gets a little tricky. So that's what we're going to work on today, is how you can deal with situations like that. So here's an example of what I mean. This problem says Jimmy and his mother planted a tree when it was 1 3/4 feet tall. Now the tree is 2 1/4 feet tall. How much has the tree grown since it was planted? We're looking at the difference here, so you'd have to subtract. Now 2 minus 1 isn't hard to subtract, but 1 minus 3, we can't have a negative fraction, so we need to find a way to change it. So one way you can do is regroup it, where you take one whole from the whole number. So instead of having 2 1/4, we're going to add 4/4 to the 1/4 from the 2. So it's a borrowing method. And you have 1 5/4 minus 1 3/4. That's one of the methods that I'm going to show you today that you can use. That's what we're going to work on. So let's get started with it. Here is our first example, and we're going to regroup mixed numbers. So that's what we're going to work on in this video. All right, so our problem that we have is 6 minus 3 2/3. So remember, the one thing we need to do is make sure we have common denominators. Well, in this scenario, we know that we're going to have to create a fraction. So it's going to be 6 minus 3 2/3. Our common denominator is going to be a 3. So we're going to have to put a 3 here with the 6. So what's the best thing to do when you have a whole number is make one whole fraction. So how many thirds do we need to make one whole? That would be 3. Now, where did we get this 3/3 or one whole from? We regrouped from the whole number of 6. So 6 now becomes a 5. Now if you look at our problem, 3 is larger than 2, and we can do our math just as we've learned in the past. So now that we have everything set up here with the regrouping method, all we have to do is 5 minus 3, which is 2. And then the numerators, 3 minus 2, which is 1/3. So that's how you get 2 1/3, is you find the common denominator, and because it's a whole number, you can regroup it to take 1 away from 6, which makes 5. You still have to put that 1 somewhere that you took, so that's why you made it into a fraction. Have this down before moving on. Okay, for this one, I'm going to show you two methods. I'm going to again show you the regrouping that we just did, and the other one I'm going to do is the improper way, which is making it an improper fraction. So when we have this problem with regrouping, the one thing you'll notice is for this situation we have unlike denominators, so we got to make them like. So if I rewrite this so we can look at it stacked, we will see that we need to make a common denominator before we do anything else. So the least common multiple of 4 and 3 is 12. So that's going to become our new denominator. So 4 times 3 gives us 12, and what we do to the bottom, we do to the top, so we have 9/12 there. 3 times 4 gives us 12 on the top, so what we do to the bottom, we do to the top. 1 times 4 is 4. Now you can't do 4 minus 9. That's not going to work to have a positive answer. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to regroup. So we're going to steal from the 5 and make that a 4. Okay? But what exactly are we moving over into this fraction? We got to make one whole. So if our denominator is 12, how many 12ths do you get to make one whole? 12 12ths. So if we add 4 plus 12, you're going to get 16. So we actually can change the 4 to a 16. Now 16 12ths is improper, correct? Of course. But we have to have that way because we stole one from 5. Now that our fractions are all proper, we can now subtract. 4 minus 2 is 2. Your denominator stays a 12. And now we have to do 16 minus 9, which gives you a total of 7. So that's the regrouping method that I just showed you now twice. Let's do the improper method. Let me show you how that works. So we're going to pick up here kind of where we left off, sort of. So we had 5 1/3, 2 3/4. You still have the fraction set up that way. Now before you do this method, you still need a common denominator. But we're going to do that afterwards. So the first thing we have to do is make these improper fractions. So remember, 5 times 3 plus 1. So 15 plus 1 is 16 over 3. For the bottom number, 4 times 2 is 8, plus 3 is 11. So we have 11/4. Now, this may work a little easier for us. You can see we have 16 minus 11. That will work. But the problem is we still need a common denominator. So let's use the same common denominator we did in the problem to the left. 12 and 12. So again, looking at the bottom number first, 4 times 3 gives us 12. What you do to the bottom, you got to do the top. 3 times 11 is 33. So because 16 was larger than 11 over here, this number over here should probably still be bigger. So 3 times what gives us 12? That'd be 4. So now you have to do 16 times 4. Well, I know that 6 times 4 is 24, and 4 times 10 is 40. So together, 40 and 24 make 64. Okay. So now we have 64 minus 33. We know for sure that's going to work. So if we subtract 4 minus 3, we get 1. 6 minus 3, we get 3, 31/12. So now the only thing left to do is turn this improper fraction into a mixed number. And we know that if we take 12 and put it into 31, 12 will go into 31 twice. That'll give us 24. And our denominator for our remainder is still going to be 12, but what do we get as a remainder here? We borrow here to make that a 2, and now we have 11 minus 4, which is 7. So that is our numerator. You can see that the answer we have here and the answer we have here both are 2 7/12. I'm just giving you two different ways to look at it. So you can choose which way you feel most comfortable with depending on the situation. But the one thing you'll see that in both situations, you need a common denominator. Okay. Copy these down if you want before you do your own problems. So as it's been recently with a few videos, I have more problems than we need because I feel like some of you are going to need extra practice. You can do all of these if you'd like. It's totally up to you. And then ask me to check the ones that you don't have to do and see if you're getting it. Or do the ones I expect you to do, and if you want to go back and try the other ones for extra practice, you can. So today, I want you to do the even numbers that you see up here, 6, 8, 10, and 12. Come back when you're done. We'll see if your work matches mine. So here are the answers you should have received. So for number 6, I changed the 6 to a 5, and I added the denominator to the numerator. 11 plus 3 is 14. Now I can do 14 minus 10, which is 4. So 5 minus 3 is 2, and you got 4 11ths. For 8, you can see that I had to borrow. So you're really borrowing over whatever the denominator is. So I made common denominators of 10. So I had to add 10 to 3 to get 13 tenths. And I took 1 away from 4 to make that happen. So now I had 3 minus 3, which is 0. 13 minus 6 is 7 tenths. For number 10, I went ahead and also got rid of 1 from 11. I made it a 10. And then I noticed that with 8, that can be our common denominator. So I didn't really have to change anything for 9 and 3/8, but I did for 2/8 because it wasn't big enough. I added a whole nother 8/8 to what I had of the 2 and make it 10. 10 minus 3 is 7. 1 and 7/8. And for 12, I had to take a whole 6 and make it into 5 and show one whole fraction to the right of it. So I noticed that we had 3 as a common denominator, so I used that again. 3/3 minus 2/3 is 1/3. 5 minus 2 is 3. So hopefully you got those correct. So sometimes you're going to have word problems. Here's an example of a word problem where you're going to be subtracting and have to regroup. Biggest difference between example 1 and example 2 is being able to find the information that's important from the problem. So Leah's making a quilt. She needs 15 yards of fabric. Leah has 2 3/4 yards of fabric. How much more does she need? So you're going to have to do 15 minus 2 3/4. This one's not too bad because you have a whole number. We're going to have to borrow from 15 to make it 14. We already have a denominator of 4, so it makes it real easy to know what fraction we're going to make a whole, which would be 4/4. So now we just subtract the whole numbers. 14 minus 2 is 12, and the numerator is 4 minus 3 is 1. And then since it's a word problem, we just put it in a sentence. Copy this down before moving on. So here are 2 problems I want you to try on your own. Come back when you're done. Remember, the biggest difference is trying to figure out what numbers you're going to subtract. Good luck. So for the first one, I took 11 minus 8.5. The whole number was pretty easy. I changed it to a 10, and we already have a denominator of 2. So I made 2 2's to show that 1 that I borrowed. So 10 minus 8 is 2, and 2 minus 1 is 1. So 2 1/2 inch is the difference between the 2 measures. And for Chad's bag of birdseed, he has 6 2/3 left. I did 10 minus 3 1/3. So I borrowed from 10, made it a 9, and we already had a denominator of 3, so I made that one whole be 3/3. And that's how I got that answer. Hopefully you got the same answers as well. And here is your box of thought. Go ahead and answer these as best as you can using full sentences, and I'll check them at the end. Here's your warm-up. We have, or I'm sorry, not your warm-up, your quiz. Done that before. So you have to subtract all of them, but remember you're going to have to use regrouping, one of the methods you've seen. So the last one here, it says, Irina put 10 cups of food in the bird feeder. The bird ate 3 3/8. For some reason, it slid over. So that may make it a little easier by rewriting that. Good luck. And that's it for today. We'll see you next lesson. Of course, in between now and then, you only have one more lesson. Well, I guess not between now and then. You only have one more lesson before our first quiz. So we'll see you next time, and then it's quiz time.